Welcome back, everybody. This is The Thing Behind the Thing. I am your host, James David Dixon. Today's show is a new format that I'm going to be using for media criticism. Let's call it Burying the Lead. The graphic behind me was made by the incomparable Patriot Post girl, Heather Dow. Heather's one of the best soldiers in the movement and one of my best friends here in Michigan. Heather, I appreciate you. In just a few minutes here today, we're going to look at the national media and the local media here in Michigan and talk about how both have fallen down on their basic duty to tell timely and true stories. At The Thing Behind the Thing, we're here for a good time, not a long time, so let's get into it. When Bari Weiss took over at CBS News, there was wailing, there was gnashing of teeth. Reports say she brought a whip to an early editorial meeting and even flipped a few tables there. More important than the presence of the new boss was her path to power. Bari Weiss, once upon a time, was in mainstream news, then went her own way at the Free Press. We're not talking about the Detroit Free Press. Now, Weiss has been brought back into the mainstream, and she comes in riding a donkey. Her Free Press has been acquired by CBS News for a hefty sum. Now Weiss leads a top legacy news property, the house Walter Cronkite built, the most trusted voice in news, CBS News. It all sounds good, but will the real Bari Weiss please stand up? Last week on 60 Minutes, they ran a segment on Margaret Atwood. Atwood, as I'm sure you know, is the author of The Handmaid's Tale. On a news program, on the gold standard for news magazine shows, Atwood was allowed to describe her books as being banned and having been banned. But they're not banned. If you got pulled over and had 100 copies of Handmaid's Tale in the passenger seat next to you, you know what would happen? You'd get a speeding ticket. If you can buy a book on Amazon, if you can possess it without worry, if it's taught in schools, if there's popular TV shows about it, your book's not banned. It's the opposite. It's wildly popular. I'm a writer myself, and someday I will be an author. I can tell you that most authors would pray for the success that Margaret Atwood and Handmaid's Tale have enjoyed. Yet at the very height of her success, Atwood would still rather play the victim card. She would rather pretend that her ideas are so important and so subversive that they had to be banned. Success isn't enough for Margaret Atwood, so she's had to order up a side of victimhood to go with it. Margaret, if no one's told you this before, I'll tell you. It's okay to embrace success. You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to play the underdog. That role is better occupied by the many authors who struggle to sell even 250 copies of their books. This is the parable of Margaret Atwood, and this is why it's important to believe in God. If Margaret Atwood had a biblical and Christian worldview, she would be thanking God for her good fortune as an author. If her book had actually been banned, she would thank God, just like the apostles thanked God for counting her worthy of such persecution. In the absence of God, Atwood is neither thankful nor honest. She's afflicted with a sickness called the disease of me, and that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Bari Weiss, it's time to show you understand the assignment and why you're at CBS News. Journalism died because journalists don't tell true stories. They tell fake stories that support whatever narrative they're promoting that day. This is what killed Dan Rather's career 20 years ago, and this is why your network hasn't been the same since. For Bari Weiss at CBS News, reality is job number one. So you've come in, you're shaking things up, you're making people nervous. Great. But until your network starts telling true stories again and leaves the make-believe to the Margaret Atwoods of the world, nothing will change. Tell true stories, Bari Weiss. Insist on them. Make CBS News great again. Because it damn sure is not and has not been for decades. I spoke recently about why journalism is going the way of Jeffrey Epstein, and I hope Bari Weiss sees this. In 2025, there's nothing so stupid a journalist won't print it. My name is James David Dixon, and this is Spotting the Slant. Our first contestant is Jennifer Bendery of Huffington Post. On X, Bendery shared a photo of the National Guard at a DC train station. Next to the guardsmen are two homely women in Handmaid's Tale outfits. Whenever white liberal women get worked up, They seem to have these costumes ready to go at a moment's notice. Maybe they have another use for them. Anyway, here's what Bendery wrote. Looks like a scene from The Handmaid's Tale. But no, just another day of Trump's militarization of D.C. right now. Look, we all know the media has a liberal bias, but what's killing it in 2025 is the stupidity bias. And that's why journalism is going the way of Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this story yet. If you rely on outlets like Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, MLive, or Bridge, you probably haven't. But 5 years after telling us that her COVID restrictions were not helpful hints, but in fact the law of the land, Governor Gretchen Whitmer now admits the truth. She was acting on very little and very bad information during COVID.
I'll be honest. I was a little annoyed when I came home for Christmas 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Like, we had to eat outside, but we were in inside pods outside. It was a little weird. Then I came back here and then I could just do whatever.
Well,
that was a bit weird, I'll be honest.
Well, but remember what the temperature was. Here, you can walk around outside all day, right? At home,
but if I could
in Michigan, in the winter, we're all inside, breathing on each other.
But if I was allowed to be inside, outside, why couldn't I just be inside?
Because you were inside, outside with just your small group of people.
And the servers and bussers.
Listen, Caleb, none of us wants to go back and relive that.
That's
we were
true.
doing the
Please.
best we could with very little or very bad information.
Lockdowns, very bad information. School shutdowns, business shutdowns for restaurants and gyms, while liquor stores and dispensaries were essential. Very bad information. Putting sick people into nursing homes while denying grandma visits from her grandkids. Bad information. You could get the demon weed, but you couldn't get cancer treatment. Very bad information. Look, nobody thinks Gretchen Whitmer is any kind of brilliant woman or that she thought of this stuff herself. But this is what us COVID truthers were saying from the beginning. It took 5 years for Gretchen Whitmer to admit to a defect of intelligence and character that was obvious to all of us in 2020. And congrats for doing it. But what about the Michigan media? At what point did they admit they were wrong? Judging by the early returns, that won't happen anytime soon. Detroit News was the only major news outlet in Michigan to report on the Caleb Hammer podcast. It's called the Financial Audit Podcast, where Whitmer made the remarks. And even their story didn't come close to touching the stuff she said about COVID. Now, how do you go from cheerleaders for COVID to church mice that quickly without doing any wrestling with your role in a psyop? The obvious takeaway here is to doubt anything you read in the Michigan media, even and especially if it quotes the governor. You can't trust that the writer has the skill, the character, or the honesty to wrestle with big ideas. You're going to need to do the critical thinking yourself. You can't outsource that to a group of underpaid writers. The next time someone tells you, and there will be a next time, based on how badly we failed the COVID experiment, the next time someone tells you to uproot society for 2 weeks, tells you not to worry because it's just 15 days, be sure to ask what's going to happen on the 16th day, and be sure to ask how they know that. Without evidence, without any reason to believe anything Whitmer ever said, the Michigan media aided and abetted the greatest fraud and the greatest constitutional breach we've ever seen in Michigan. If Whitmer had very bad information, it was the job of the media to probe and prod for those answers. For instance, these are the kind of questions you might want to ask if someone has bad information that would show how bad their information is. You might say, hey, Governor, you say we need to stay home for 2 weeks. How do you know that? What place on earth can you name that stayed home for 2 weeks and slowed the growth of COVID? Or, Governor, if COVID is a global virus, stopping its spread seems unlikely. Why isn't the smart move for us to get the virus and weaken it with time and exposure? If we know that sick people and fat people are the ones most affected by COVID, why wouldn't your guidance target those people as opposed to school children and able-bodied people in their middle age? In the olden days, they called this thing where everyone gets the virus and the virus weakens, they called that herd immunity. But in 2021, when there was a jab to peddle, The Michigan media treated herd immunity as if it were the Loch Ness Monster. This is a failure that nobody, not one soul in the Michigan media, has atoned for. There was a million logical questions that could have been and should have been asked that would have shown Whitmer to be acting on very bad information. But the Michigan media never asked them. The only time they criticized Whitmer was when she pushed too many tables together at a Lansing dive bar. And this is the failure of media as an institution. Nobody says, hey, Big Gretch, what basis did you have to even create that rule in the first place? Nobody asked what led Whitmer to make the rule. They only criticized her for breaking it because they were cheerleaders for the rule. So to see her violate it and then not die of the COVID that was going to kill us all kind of blew up the spot for everybody. It kind of made everyone look bad. So Bari Weiss, at the national level, you need to get CBS News telling true stories again. But I have a little bit of a different message for the Lansing media. Herd immunity is real, but herd credibility is a myth, and it's killing you. I look at you guys, and I don't see how you could find your work the least bit satisfying. You all write the same stories at the same time with damn near the same headlines. You pass this little Journalist of the Year award around between each other, all without anyone ever doing groundbreaking work. And what have you really gotten for it? You guys were the Gretchen Whitmer fan club, and what was the reward? Whitmer's a year from retiring from politics. She has nothing to lose. She has no ego investment in the lies of COVID. Whitmer can admit that she had very bad information on COVID and even laugh about it. But if Gretchen Whitmer had bad information in 2020, what did the Michigan media have? And what did they tell us? What they had was a captive audience. The media cheered for the same lockdowns they were exempt from. Then they covered every single press conference where fear was sold. They got record hits in 2020, record hits in 2021, but what do any of them have to show for it now? Big Gretch missed her chance to go to Washington. She knows now that she will never be president. The Michigan media tied itself to Whitmer's hip, and now they're dragged down with each new cackling admission. Gretchen Whitmer was bad in 2020. We all know it. Even Whitmer can admit this herself now. But the Michigan media was worse. That's why you've unsubscribed, and that's why you don't miss it.